Fort Stanton Cave's Snowy River Passage. Within its confines, the Snowy River Formation. At 4.1 miles, it is thought to be the longest calcite formation in a cave anywhere in the world. The story begins in the early 1970s when a group of cavers began digging in breakdown following strong airflow, which is often an indicator of additional cave passage. The passage they excavated was named Priority 7. But due to the unstable nature of some of the areas of the dig and the return of flowing water in the north end of the cave, the dig was abandoned. Almost 30 years later, September 2000, the Fort Stanton Cave Study Project organized a group of their volunteer cavers to look at some of the old digging projects. Lloyd Schwartz was very impressed with the airflow and decided to dig in a different area of Priority 7. September 2001, after only 5 dig trips, Lloyd Schwartz, John McLean, Andrew Greco, and Don Becker opened up Starry Night's Passage, named after the starburst gypsum that decorated the walls. Surveying down passage, it appeared that they had reached the end, but the roar of massive air lured them to a small duck-under air gap. After walking down a short passage, they came to an intersection. Much to their amazement, a borehole passage, the floor covered with a river of white calcite. Snowy River had been discovered. But before exploration could continue, the Bureau of Land Management, the administrator of Fort Stanton Cave, required a gate to be installed to protect the Snowy River Formation and the preparation of an environmental assessment to define the approach to further exploration. Finally, in July 2003, the first expedition. Heading south, they surveyed a half-mile of passage in Snowy River and discovered a muddy side passage and named it Mud Turtle after a rock formation at the entrance. The Labor Day expedition began on August 30th, 2003. 2 survey teams entered Snowy River. One team picked up the survey in Snowy River South and added almost another half mile with no end in sight. The other team headed north and surveyed a little over 2/3 of a mile, finding a large side lead and discovering snowy rapids. The next day, September 1st, a single team surveyed about a 1/4 mile in Snowy River North when they encountered flowing water, which they named Crystal Creek. The environmental assessment stated that until water samples were taken, no one could enter the water for fear of biological contamination. So the team turned around and headed to the large lead to the east that was noted the day before. Surveying up a large unconsolidated breakdown pile, they discovered a train-sized tunnel about halfway up. This they named the Metro. But it was late, and it was time to leave, only surveying a couple of 100 feet of passage. October 2003, the Columbus Day Expedition. 3 days were spent exploring the Metro, netting almost 1 1/4 miles of passage before finding Disappointment Dome that marked the end of the passage. There was also a trip to Snowy River South, adding another quarter mile and ending the survey where the passage had lowered to a 2-foot high by 20-foot wide crawlway. But the most significant trip was yet to come. October 14th, Mud Turtle Passage was surveyed, and when the map was plotted, it was found that Mud Turtle Passage ended in Breakdown, 40 feet down below Don Sawyer Memorial Hall. Discovered in 1971 by digging and blowing rubble at Roaring Hill Passage, the cavers could not find the source of the airflow. Now the mystery was solved. The air was coming from Mud Turtle and diffusing throughout the entire breakdown in North Don Sawyer Memorial Hall. When the October expedition ended, the Snowy River survey was slightly over 2 miles in length, and with the metro included, almost 3.5 miles of passage had been discovered. But in November 2003, the Bureau of Land Management decided to close Priority 7. There were too many unstable areas, and all the traffic had made them even more unstable. An alternate entrance to access Snowy River would need to be found. The best option was to dig a shaft between Don Sawyer Memorial Hall and Mud Turtle Passage. But before digging could continue, another gate would need to be fabricated. April 2005, the installation of the gate was complete, and on July 7, 2005, Senator Pete Domenici visited Fort Stanton Cave in support of his legislation declaring Snowy River as a National Cave Conservation Area. Digging began in October 2005 by members of the Fort Stanton Cave Study Project. At first, diggers could stand on the bottom of the shaft and hand buckets up to a line of cavers to be dumped. As the dig progressed, temporary wood bracing was installed and will be replaced with a more permanent solution in the future. The diggers hammered on rocks to break them into manageable pieces. Prying and digging with shovels and bare hands, they filled buckets.
Bucket up! A bucket!
Brimming with spoils, the buckets travel up rope, through a landing,
Clear!
hauled up by an A-frame hoist. They make their way to a bucket tram to continue their journey to the spoils pile.
Bucket!
Located about 100 feet down the breakdown pile in Don Sawyer Memorial Hall. Finally, on June 30th, 2007, breakthrough. Members of the Fort Stanton Cave Study Project crawl from Don Sawyer Memorial Hall to Mud Turtle Passage. After digging over 40 feet, installing 19 levels of bracing, 4 8-foot ladders, and removing 36 cubic yards of material in 6 9-day expeditions, in which 4 to 5 days were spent digging, they made their way through Mud Turtle Passage, a 1,028-foot mud-floored serpentine conduit, the gateway to Snowy River. Rounding the last bend, Snowy River lies before them, and much to their surprise, there was water in Snowy River. It was dry in 2001 when discovered, even though there was leftover water in Fort Stanton Cave's main corridor from the flooding episode of 1975 to 1993. So it was thought the formation was ancient and no longer active. In 2003, a sample of the top layer of the Snowy River Formation was dated 150 years plus or minus 60 years. This led us to believe that the water flow was maybe a once-in-a-century event. In April 2007, the main corridor had begun to flood, but the absence of a deposit seemed to indicate different sources of water that would act independent of each other. But there it was, water in Snowy River. Yep, they were surprised and excited, actually seeing Snowy River in action, but at the same time, disappointed, for the unfinished survey and exploration would have to wait. They didn't waste any time. It was an opportunity for science to be conducted on an actively forming Snowy River. Water samples for hydrological analysis were collected. Water depth to calculate flow rate was performed, and temperature measurements were taken. Dr. Penny Boston and Mike Spildy, distinguished scientists, traveled to Snowy River to obtain samples of the black manganese coating on the cave walls. This crust is believed to be deposited by microbiological action and precipitated as a byproduct of metabolism. July 7th, the water in Snowy River measured 14 3/4 inches. And on October 13th, the last day of the October expedition, there was 13 1/4. October 30th, 2007, one day before the cave was closed for the bat hibernation, a final water monitoring trip was scheduled. The monitoring crew were totally unprepared for what they found. Snowy River was dry. After falling a ½ inch per month from July to October, 13 1/4 inches of water disappeared in a little over 2 weeks. Everybody had assumed it would take at least 2 years to dry out. Everybody was encouraged. If the formation stayed dry, exploration could begin after the cave opened in the spring. April 26, 2008, Snowy River was still dry, so the exploration could continue in the south where the survey had left off in 2003. The area was so low that team members had to roll interspace with crawling and duck walking. The survey ended at Snowy River Spring, the point at which the formation goes under the east wall and was not enterable. But the main Snowy River passage continued, although muddy, to a breakdown room that was explored on April 29th. Surveying through the room, the south end went into a slippery mud funnel which led to a hands and knees crawl they named Mud Lizard. At its end, another breakdown room that led to the continuation of Snowy River. May 1st, starting at the end of the Return to Snowy River room, the passage was a hands and knees crawl with a few duck walks. Eventually, it became a series of low pools floored with calcite rafts. Snowy River continued to increase in size, changing into a 15-foot-high canyon. With its 2 parallel lines running along the sides, it was named the Underground Railroad. The April expedition added 2/3 of a mile to Snowy River South. June 28th, the first day of the July expedition. Following the meandering passage, the dimensions staying roughly 15 by 15 feet, a ½ mile was surveyed, ending while the corridor went on big as ever. July 1st, after a short distance, a cross passage was found, the first since Turtle Junction. But the main focus was on Snowy River. So they continued on, finding an area decorated with stalactites, a rare occurrence in Snowy River. Rounding a bend, the ceiling jumped to 35 feet, and another large opening appeared on a balcony above. The exploration ended where some large breakdown blocks had covered the passage floor. Naming the area Buenos Aires, meaning good air, the team finished up with a half-mile of survey. July 3rd, 2008, there was a congressional fact-finding trip to Snowy River in support of the National Conservation Area designation for Fort Stanton Cave. Representing BLM were Jeff Jarvis and Jim Goodbar. Clint Taylor representing Senator Domenici, and Jorge Silva representing Senator Bingaman. The last trip of the July expedition was on the 4th. Crawling under the Buenos Aires breakdown, the passage continued, growing ever larger, encountering additional breakdown areas, ceiling heights in the 50-foot range. They found high leads, some with flowstone cascades emanating from them. Finally, they came to a large breakdown pile that had collapsed over Snowy River, and with no easy route around, they called it a night with over a half-mile of survey. The July expedition added 1.5 miles to the map. July 27, 2008, Fort Stanton experienced a tremendous flood event when the remnants of Hurricane Dolly dumped around 3 to 4 inches of rain in the area and up to 7 inches in the Ruidoso area. July 31st, it was noted that Government Spring, the resurgence of Snowy River water into the Rio Bonito, was flowing quite significantly. August 3rd, a team went to Snowy River to investigate. Snowy River was flowing again. Data loggers for water levels and temperature were immediately installed. During the October expedition, hydrological measurements were taken by Dr. Lewis Land and Talon Newton, and water samples for DNA analysis were obtained for Diana Northrup of UNM. As the expedition drew to a close, the flow had slowed down and the level dropped from July. The hope is that Snowy River will dry out by spring so the survey and exploration can continue in 2009.